hope this is the solution. I don't know what that sound out there is. Hi, folks. I'm so sorry. So I'm moving my camera. It's one of those days, y'all. I am not even kidding. So Chrome decided that it really disliked me. And now I have like stuff in the way. We're going to get nice and close, people. Now you can see my lights. It's super. Sorry, guys. All right. And a potted plant is over there. Lord in heaven, huh? All right. Moving you out of the way. Now you see the real behind the scenes stuff. The behind the scenes stuff. Okay. All right, everybody. Munchkin, can you just move this just a little towards me? I would so appreciate it. Because I feel very far away from everybody. Okay. So, taking a trip, folks. And that's perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. So, my apologies for the delay. And also, my thank you very much for everybody being uncooked spaghetti. And if you watched... I actually proved what that means to all of you during step 2. So I have a couple questions that folks wanted me to answer. So I'm going to start with those unless we get anything else with people popping on. And I know that this is out of the normal schedule, so I also understand that this isn't something that people have got worked into their calendars, and that is okay. And I do thank you very much. You're going to love our surprise guest next week, from this week for next week. I will tell you just a little bit. Now, I didn't want to spoil, but I'll just tell you. So Kara Krasinski is an amazing woman who is a professor now, has her PhD in occupational therapy. She is also formerly known and fabulously known as the Pocket OT. She has a number of successful books that she's written internationally, and she speaks internationally and has been a colleague and friend of mine for years now. We both kind of started out together. Asper Kids came out about the same time that she was starting her first books, and that was really exciting. So anyway, she is anything and everything that you want to know sensorially. I am telling you, this woman knows, and I think it's really important because we think and we talk a lot about our kids, right? And helping, there are more things that are built or talked about, addressed generally as far as sensory issues in kids. But you don't stop being on the spectrum as you get older. So you just have to adapt some things. That, and also, I can tell you, so often behavioral things that we see in our kids or in ourselves as we're growing up, and oh my goodness, I look back, how many things I could have solved if I had really better sensory input. Because if you can ground yourself sensorially, you can calm that whole spiral down and use your grounders. And they are really your most effective weapon in combating, I think, I talk about anxiety being the nemesis of awesomeness. And it is, I think, very much to that point, though, the executive functioning challenges with impulse control, I would say, and emotional regulation are massive. And all of that can be aided with sensory input. So that being said, I'm excited for you to meet Kara. She is fantastic. And definitely check out Pocket OT if you have some time. Okay, so we have 2 main questions this week. And also I wanted to thank you for the feedback on last week's Q&A. I thought it was really powerful too. Karen said, awesome, and it really amazing, and it really was. I think it was a very powerful time together, and yeah, I left feeling that way myself. So it's always nice to hear somebody else thinks the same thing, right? It's a bit like going on a date and being like, gee, I hope they like me as much as I like them. Okay, so there are 2 questions that were outstanding from the community board, so I'm going to jump on them first, and they may take up a good bit of our time, but we'll see. So the first question had to do largely with anxiety. Can I grab your screen so I can read it nice and loudly? Because it's, where is this coming from? And it's sort of anticipation. issues. Thank you so much. Okay. I have found that anticipating an event like the start of the school year, even if it is something that looking forward to, can be just plain awful. It's true. Perseverating thoughts, stimming, heart palpitations, feeling nauseous, flurries of ineffectual activity, while also having a hard time focusing on the things that really need to get done, blah, 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 more executive functioning stuff, blah, 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 blah. I'm often a wreck. She means just anticipating things. And this is so true, even pleasant ones. I get it. Beyond grounders, what I'm doing, is there anything else to recommend? Okay, I love it. So thank you. Yeah, so one of the things that we look for in kids is, we know that kids on the spectrum really want things to be organized in a routine, right? We know that ritual and routine makes such a big, it's so important. And that when you change that, it disrupts everything. True. I know that, it's important. You can tell teachers and school systems, make sure that my child knows before there's a fire alarm, or if we're going to change seating ahead of time. That sort of thing makes a big difference. Just having a knowledge that it's happening. The reason that the change then happens is, or that the anxiety happens when there's change, and I realize that's not the question. I do realize that. Again, it's because we're looking to have some sense of control over a situation that is largely uncontrollable. So you're in which you are most likely to encounter in real time, while also having to function in life, social challenges and sensory challenges. Now, I understand what you're talking about. Okay, this is from Karen. Karen, I get it. It's almost like stage fright for life, right? Like the things, even whether that is, if you celebrate Christmas, getting ready for Christmas. For me, you want to hear a huge time that I always have felt like that, and it's not a thing right now, but when the kids were coming home from school, when the first school bus was going to be bringing my youngest home around 2:20. Around 2:00, I could see the buses, I could hear them behind my house driving up the road. They were headed to the school to go get the kids, and instantly my stomach would start churning. Now, I love my children. What the heck, right? Like, why? Am I glad that they're coming home? Yes, of course. I'm excited to see them. Why on earth would I be so terrified about it? Well, guess what? Even with people I love, social anxiety, because I think, there's a bubble when it's just you. I think that's why so many people on the spectrum retreat and withdraw. But just the anticipated change in the environment. So it's the same as change, the other kind of change that we're talking about causing anxiety. It's rigid thinking. We talked about that a little bit with the uncooked pasta. This week, this next step we're heading into, we're going to be talking about thinking. Last step was all about our emotions. And remember, when we do the backwards dominoes, when we say, okay, so in life, we observe something, right? And then after we observe, it's observe, think, feel, do, right? So we're peeling that backwards, so that you can change your do and your feels just by changing your thoughts, and using some handy dandy tools. All right. So as we get into this next step, we're going to be talking about theory of mind, which is a big one. And essentially it has a lot to do with not being able to step into somebody else's shoes, right? So it's very, very hard when you don't have a good idea of what is going to be expected of you, so that you can prepare for it, to make sure that you have checked every box, you've got everything in a row, blah, 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 the scene is set, it's all good. If you don't have that certainty, then what do you have? Well, for those of us who are more prone to, really feeling powerful levels of intense anxiety, what you have is more of a feeling. It's like the nightmare of going to school without having found out that there was a test that you didn't study for, right? It's that same feeling, which is ridiculous when we're talking, like you said, about something good. And so I get that. Is there something in particular to that? Is there something that you can do besides grounders? Absolutely. The grounders, yes. That would be your nuts. Okay. And not Edgar, right? Not the what you're going to need to do. And that's coming up. We're going to be really, really, really talking about that next too, right? Is questioning what other people's expectations actually are. Do you actually know what they are? And when you don't, how can you find them out? And when you don't, what can you tell yourself until you find them out? Because I am quite sure that my kids were coming home and just being glad to be here and being glad to get out of a crazy environment that is school, have a snack, be in their familiar environment. But, I think probably part of it is also an accumulation of little T traumas for me, in that so often somebody would come home and, it would be, because things tend to be extreme, right? Like, this is the worst day of my life. This happened. This person hates me. I'm like, whatever. Like, and it wasn't always like that. God knows. And in fact, it's probably more like 1/10 of the days were like that, or whatever. But gosh, this keeps happening. How I'm telling you such truths from my own life. But when you've seen that, when during that whole day, there's very little you can do to hope, to control. There's nothing you can do, right? And a lack of control is hard to not feel controlled by. It's something that we all need to, learn to deal with. But I understand, because oftentimes there would be something that went wrong or was misunderstood, and I could tell where it was being misunderstood, but then I was going to have to interact with the school in some way after the fact. And sometimes I would do that successfully, and sometimes I wouldn't as successfully. And more successfully, I have learned that is certainly the case as time has gone on. But when we talked about this last week, but then if I didn't do well, or rather, see, look at how I just phrased that, or if the faculty didn't get it, if things didn't go as well, if my child was just, it hurts to see someone you love hurting, right? Then it feels very much like, to use the words that I heard somebody else say, you're a failure as a parent. For me, also a failure as a professional. And I know that that's not the case. But so I think it's the nuts that are going to be important to you are figuring out exactly what you need to challenge, what the negative thoughts are that are coming up the most. Again, if it's the failure, okay, so then what can you do about that? And we'll talk about that this week. But it's in the nuts. It's an important one, and so is we're going to be talking about fried marbles, rigid thinking. We're going to be talking about 1,000 broken light bulbs, which is got to get it all right, or basically, I stink. It's going to be important. So watch those this week. They're really powerful, and pay attention to the thinking. Using your grounders is essential to get you to a place of being able to think. And then once you're there, it's identifying specifically what your emotions, that's what we talked about last week. I loved your house, by the way. That's just downstairs, was awesome. Use that to be able to identify your emotions, slow it down, and then think about, what do I need to think differently so that I feel differently? And what needs to happen in order for me to think different thoughts? And at this point, it's generally specific kinds of communication. Last week, I talked a lot about some of the things that I say to school, to the teachers in the beginning of the year, and some that I've learned, some phraseology that I've learned not to use. So go back and watch it. As far as in general, letting anticipation be something that causes great consternation and stress, I hate to say it's going to be a thing. Then again, you're human, and Everybody feels that way to a degree. It's stage fright. It really is. Because if you were doing those things and no one were watching, would you feel afraid? No. In general, I think it has to do with finding a more accurate way to align our self-concepts with what we think other people are expecting of us and or are seeing. So that's the next step. And that's what you're going to be coming up in the next 2 weeks, right? So it's, yes, using your grounders, absolutely, holding the pillow, getting through it, and identifying the emotions that you were feeling. And in real time, staying, do not act until you're back up here, right? Okay. So it's a little bit waiting to find out just a little bit longer what to do with those thoughts. For now, what you need to be doing is identifying the feelings. Look for patterns. What experiences specific? Is it someone contacts you, or is it, I know going up to school, even just to get something from the front office would make me feel nervous. Because am I dressed right? Am I going to say the right thing to the wrong person? I get it. And that's the stuff that I realize is conversations between myself and myself in my head. So we're going to do some challenging of that in this next coming week. To the other question, which was ADD, ADHD versus ASD, and during the whole diagnostic process. And, you've heard me talk about alphabet soup and how, it's not really having ASD and ADD and, or ADHD and sensors. Okay. So to the questions on, could I clarify that because you're in the process of, a diagnosis. Okay. I guess it depends a little bit on what the diagnostician is wanting to see, because the question said that the diagnostician didn't want yet to give any meds for ADHD or ADD because that would make it harder to identify or to see, I believe it was, the quote unquote symptoms, I think it was, of ASD, or just harder to identify ASD, something like that. Okay, that is a bit like saying one problem is the autism spectrum is not just so things that happen as a result of having ADD or ADHD, right? Primarily, we're looking at impulsivity, inability to focus. Well, guess what? That is exacerbated also by sensory input. It is also exacerbated by executive functioning skills that are classic to ASD, and certainly that they can arise in people with ADHD, ADD. Here's the deal, okay? When it comes to having a particular diagnosis for the sake of getting the correct pharmaceutical treatment to help, I'm right there. I am not a doctor, so take that under advisement, but I am going to tell you, right? I take a stimulant in the morning. I take a booster later on in the day and midday, and another at the kind of like dinner, just before dinner hour. And I will tell you, without that, I don't have ADHD. I didn't get distracted in school. I was able to keep myself pretty organized. So, but I didn't realize I was actually using coping mechanisms, color coding things, and et cetera, et cetera. The meds, I only found out the whole ADD or ADD part of it the ASD part was identified first. And what happened was I told my doctor how much coffee I was drinking to stay alert and do all the things that I needed to do. At that point, it was as a mom of young kids. And that was the question, you need to take this computer test, which is one way of diagnosing ADD. And I said, I've never had a problem, blah, 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 blah. Okay, whatever. Well, I took the test and I bombed it. Here's why. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Caffeine's a stimulant. I was self-medicating. I was trying to give my brain that extra boost. It's the same reason as this water that I'm drinking here. Yes, with the red ruby slippers, but red heels. Is like, you can see it's like 90% lemon juice, okay, and a little bit of water, because it alerts. It gives me an alert sensorially. Here's the thing: if your doctor, you do not need to have the ADD or ADHD challenges in play to their fullest degree to be able to see the whole aspect of being on the spectrum. If you understand what you're looking for, I guess it's a bit like having a recipe, and there are a couple of primary ingredients in there, and then saying, well, if you take one of those ingredients out, or you mute it with something else, are the other two ingredients imperceptible? No. We are not a constellation of defects and disorders, right? You can still use that portrait of neurodiversity and talk about and identify rigidity in thinking. A stimulant doesn't make you less rigid of a thinker. It doesn't change special interests. It doesn't alleviate social anxiety. You can use other meds to help with, Temple and I talk a lot about the use of basically kind of permanent low-grade antidepressants and how those seem to help a lot. But I guess my point is, can you have ADD, ADHD without being on the spectrum or without having autism? Yes, you can. You can. Nobody who has autism doesn't struggle with the topics that fall under ADD or ADHD. Can you have sensory issues without being on the spectrum entirely, or without being autistic? Sure. But I will also tell you that when you know what you're looking for, more often than not, I have seen people who thought they just had sensory things going on, and when they really understood autism and didn't just see it as a checklist of problems, but more as a checklist of elements of a persona or a life, that's exactly where they were, and were able to then get a good diagnosis that helped get them the right pharmaceutical, pharmacological help to support the rest of the work they're doing. I can tell you, I can't without my, again, it's a low-grade antidepressant, but without it, I am crying within a day. So if that sounds confusing, I'm sorry, because I guess the answer really is, why does it matter? And I don't mean to be flippant. I mean, literally, why does it matter? Because if one understands the greater persona and how much of the portrait of a neurodiverse person is not at all tied to or related to, not at all related to attention issues, there's no reason to not help medicate somebody or help support them pharmacologically if that's what the person's interested in doing, until ASD is also identified. That doesn't make sense. If the issue is, is there also you're sure of an ASD diagnosis, but is there also an ADD or ADHD diagnosis? The experience will already be there. The ADHD or ADD experience is there. The only reason that you need to add an additional quote unquote label is for accommodations in the workplace, school, and or medicine. For all practical purposes, you need the one umbrella. But for those things, you do need a medical diagnosis. And the only way for them to do that is to list them as separate labels. So I guess the question remains, why do they need to know? Attention meds will not in any way mute an ASD identification. If you take that portrait of neurodiversity or your checklist and you go through it and you go through all of the elements and how do they resemble your life or someone else's life, almost none of them are attention issues. And again, they all overlap. So I don't know if you remember the word phenotype. There's the genotype, which is literally what your DNA says, and phenotype is like what it looks like. So there's like a gene for red hair. I don't remember what it is. See something or blah, 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 blah. This is what it looks like. That's the phenotype. Okay. Genetically, all those things are super, super, super close. And honestly, we're the ones who artificially put lines, right? They're not actually there. It's kind of like saying what makes someone, Kamala Harris, who's just been nominated for vice president of the United States, is of a mixed heritage, African American, well, actually Caribbean American, and she self-identifies as Black and Asian. Her mom was from India, right? So at what point, like, this is where we put all the labels and the borders. If you look from the sky, there's no such thing as continent, countries. We draw the lines and redraw the lines, and we say this is enough to be, this race or that race. It's all artificial. So in this case, teasing them apart really has much more to do with knowing the purpose. If the purpose is to be able to get accommodations, then yes, you do need the separate diagnoses. But an ADD or ADHD diagnosis does not in any way preclude ASD. And again, a knowledgeable diagnostician will understand, especially if you remake that point using the tools that you've been given, that portrait and checklist, that there's very much more to being on the spectrum than attention issues. And again, my diagnoses were years apart, with ASD being first. So, in that case, but more often than that's rare. Usually it's ADD or ADHD is diagnosed first. So I know it's probably a crazy answer and it's complicated, except for it's not. In the end, it's pretty simple. Why do they need to know? Use your tools. That's part of self-advocating. Okay? Okay. Everybody, I appreciate your flexibility. I know these have been long-winded answers, but the fact is that they're true. They're complicated questions, really, because they're not one moment. So use those dominoes backwards. I know we haven't talked about that much, but we're about to. Get ready for theory of mind stuff. That's a big one, mind blindness. I hope that most of you have The Secret Book of Social Rules and have Ask for Kids, which is the first book I ever wrote. I hope that you have them because you've got me, right? And that is something that nobody else in the world except for me, our founding class, right, has right now. That's it. And there are answers in there that I took a whole lot of time, right, putting down in just the right way that will stick with you in different ways simply because you're reading them as life was evolving for me too. And I think that's a good thing. So everybody, I love you. I will see you next week. And you will have all your beginning of step 3 stuff. This is going to be really exciting. And I did load up the calendar that was requested. I think it was Cecilia requested it. It is in your dashboard. And you know what's crazy is a month from now, we're going to be getting ready to bring in the second class. Can you believe that? Y'all are going to be the vets by that point, you know. So you'll see their launch party is in the beginning of October, and that's going to be amazing. You're going to be their mentors in so many ways, and the more involved that you would like to be, you can be. And remember, you will always have new stuff coming to you through your own deep dives. So, okay, everybody, love you much, and see you soon. Bye, guys.